And now we will dive into one of the key pillars of Gaia-X, trust. And this section introduces the Gaia-X Trust Framework, new release, Danube. Please welcome Christoph Strnadl, and CTO, and Roland Fadrany, COO. They will share with us these developments. Thank you.
Definitely. Welcome. We split the presentation like we did last time. I will talk about the business requirements and the business needs that we are enabling, and then Christoph will give you a glimpse how it works in the engine room. So, ecosystem across ecosystems and cross-domain trust is really important if you want to scale. And what we started, a very simple system, sounds simple, to identify participants, and then how we're going to put this on infrastructure. But there is a lot of need for different data spaces to have domain-specific, so ecosystem-specific requirements and criteria that they need to realize. And I want to talk you through how we do this. Now, when you take a simple example and you have different industries, like we have lighthouse projects in automotive, in energy, in smart city, in production, when you look at those, if they are working inside, they can basically do whatever they want and share data. But the problem is the unforeseen future. So when automotive started to implement their most critical business processes vertically, all of a sudden European Union wanted to push into electric vehicles by 2035. So that means that the energy sector data spaces all of a sudden need to be part of the automotive data spaces. And the same is true across regions. When you have supplier and productions in Korea or in China, and they deliver parts to the automotive industry. So how do you manage that across different regions? Now, it's really important to understand that there need to be a common denominator for all these kind of things in order to make it most efficient, and also to do what we heard earlier, the onboarding efficient and the operations efficient. And so when you look at the different layers of such a trust ecosystem, you have the ecosystem pane, where you have the ecosystem as such, and we say there is a custodian. That's an organization that can basically define the rules for the ecosystem. Underneath that, you have the usage plane. This is the organizational operationalization. How can you have trust? How you can exchange data and information, or even entire applications? And then sometimes I get the question, how do the user do that? Because we talk about participant IDs and digital wallets. Take it one step easier. You probably, as an SME, will use an application that handles the whole personal ID for yourself. But the point is, it's still a valid PID. Underneath that, you have the management pane. This is what you need to have, some basic functions like a service catalog, registry, other federation services, and so on. This is important for the ecosystem and for technical interoperability. And then at the lowest level, you have the trust plane with domain and geo extensions, where you have multiple clearinghouses working together in the distributed ledger format. It's a truly federated system. And on the very right side, you can see some of the organizations we have that are actually doing this today. So you have Ponto6, T-Systems, Gaia-X as orchestrators. You have CISPE, OVH, Orange, and many others that are running clearinghouse services. Now, this is a single ecosystem. Now, here's the problem when you have multiple ecosystems. And you can see, and that's probably the most important part, they have different custodians, they have different clearinghouses, they have different trust service providers, but they are still interoperable because they use the same architecture and they use the same clearinghouse concept and the same trust framework. And so they can exchange directly data between them as well as between the different ecosystems. And we took that concept one step further in Danube, and that I think is really a new game in town. The domain extensions, or how I really like what Christoph calls them, bring your own rules. And that's a cool thing, because when you see the ecosystems as I just explained it, and now you say, well, the custodian brings the rules. The organizational interoperability means you have an extended participant ID. So we're not only having an identification who you are through a VAT number or AIDAS. What we really have is we can say there is domain-specific criteria, which is different by region, which is different because of legal, this is different because of certification. Think about something very simple. When we work with the finance ecosystem, you probably need a bank license in order to access certain kind of data. And this is something we can add here, and we can check in the same way and with the same compliance engine that we use for the standard ones. The next part is domain-specific service criteria. So it's compliance by design or code to address regulation. Again, we have one sprint that is about finance industry. They estimate that about 20% of their IT project cost goes into compliance, 20%. If we can only half it or take away 1/3, it's a huge case. And especially Europe, we are the masters of regulation. We have regulations before we have solutions. So this is something where we really need to be very realistic that this is a game changer. And as a consequence, we may have specific or standardized clearinghouses. So there might be clearinghouses that are in a certain region, like for example, Japan or Korea, that can access trust service providers that are only available in the region for whatever reason. That's sovereignty, you decide. The same is true maybe in other areas where certain trust service providers of criteria you need can only be accessed by organizations that actually inside the ecosystem. And if we realize that, we have a lot of real tangible benefits. So we can do automation of compliance, we can do automation of regulatory requirements. We have a low-cost, inclusive solution for SMBs, and we heard that several times today. Efficient is only if it's available for SMBs. We are compatible across multiple ecosystem, and most important, there is no lock-in with a single operator through decentralization, because this is the only way you guarantee a market. If you don't create a market, those solutions are very dangerous from a risk perspective, because they would tie you into a single source of truth, and that single source of truth basically is market dominance. That's monopoly. Now, in order to give a little more detail on this one, I have a very simple application. I don't say a company, but you can use it everywhere in Porto. It's a ride-hailing app. So let's imagine that all the rides that people want at this moment are in a catalog. And everyone, in theory, could provide such a ride. But there are criteria. You have to have a generic participant ID from Gaia, so you need to be identified. You have an extended participant ID because by the law, you have to have a valid driver's license, and the driver has to be more than 25 years old. And then we have domain criteria, because you need a street legal car, and it should have 4 doors. Now, with that information, anyone who wants to provide such a ride could theoretically, without a central provider now, say, I present these evidences to a digital clearinghouse. And the clearinghouse will verify it against the trust service providers. So the general participant ID might be EIDAS or a VAT number, so the trust service provider would be EIDAS, the European Union. As we are in Porto, the driver's license would most likely be checked against the license office, and the same is true for the domain criteria, also a local Portuguese API from a trust service provider where I can check if a car is street legal. And if that verification is positive, the clearinghouse will issue the VCs for the driver, and the driver will present them to the catalog, and the catalog is open to everyone who fulfills those criteria. So all of a sudden, without a single central provider, and it can be multiple clearinghouses, you can establish that relation between an available service and domain-specific criteria, both on participant and on extension side. Now, the same has been done on geographical extensions. We enable trust across regions. There is sometimes a question why we do need to share data. Why do we need to share data across different regions? Well, this is, to me, a very interesting question, because the answer has been given 60 years ago when we decided that all our industries go highly specialized. We split every work process in 100 different steps. And when you are consequent and you want to digitalize your business, you need to digitalize all these interfaces, because if you're an OEM and you build a plane or a car and you want to create a digital twin of that, you need to talk to all your component vendors and get their mini-me's to put them together to one single digital twin. So what we've done here is we have the same structure as before, and now we have regional digital IDs that needs to be identified. So regional digital IDs means it has to be a government issued or a government trusted digital ID. We need to have a trust service provider including access, and if that is not guaranteed outside the region, we have something which is called notarization service, where you can notarize this verification and it can be used from then onwards. Secondly, we need to think about regional specific permissible standards. So we have implemented global standards, we have implemented European standards, but if we go in other regions, there is all different standards that are available and totally valid. And they have different conformity assessment bodies that basically prove those standards. And again, you have a notarization function. And finally, the use of specific or standardized clearinghouses. And how that works is you create trust on a digital ID that is in a certain region. What we do is we wrap it into a Gaia-X verifiable credential. And that means it's interoperable and it can be read and used in all other regions. But one thing is very important, and we had this question this morning in the press conference. The decision whether you trust for a specific use case that other person or that other company is entirely yours. We just tell you this person has been verified against a Canadian digital ID, and you can use that business case. So it's an automotive business case or an aerospace business case, it's probably no problem to trust a Canadian entity. If it comes down to healthcare data, it might be a different story. But it's your choice. We are just enabling transparency. So the benefits are true sovereignty on regional terms, global recognition and interoperability, full transparencies between the parties, a harmonized trust levels across regions. When it comes down to cybersecurity, that's not even done across Europe with the different cybersecurity standards, and the per use case rule-enabled trust transparency. And with that, Christoph will tell you how it really works.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Roland. Actually, me or part of my team sitting, actually co-working together with the team in the Policy and Rules Committee, and especially our members, is part of how we can deliver compliance documents and implementation and the architecture documents almost at the same time. So it's not a typically waterfall process where you have the business requirements here, and then you have a specification, and then a detailed implementation plan, and then you do testing, which takes us ages and is a little bit difficult because all the examples are in the making. And I tell you how we solved that in the mission for the CTO team, because normally we take, or actually, as I just told, we participate in the creation of the compliance document, which is kind of the requirements for us. And then, as you are well aware of, we produce the software and write the specification in the form, and this is for Tagus and Loire, in the form of monolithic component. The compliance engine being the most important one, implementing and checking the compliance, of course. You also know that last year in Helsinki, we mentioned that we will separate the compliance part, the compliance pillar, from the technical compatibility. Where do you see technical compatibility in the old architecture? Where is it? And the answer is, it's built in. It's not externally visible. It's kind of the backdrop, the assumptions, how you build a monolithic code. And that was the perfect architectural choice. I would have done the same as Pierre, my predecessor, has done. And then together we develop an extension mechanism. The color coding here means a little bit, the more purple the things are, the more directly those rules, those compliance documents are either governed by the Policy and Rules Committee of Gaia-X or implemented by the people in the CTO team in the Gaia-X lab. So we have geography and domain extensions. They brought to us by a custodian, but for instance, complying to European and Gaia-X values. We also allow, or have to allow in the software implementation later on, bring your own rules, where we have completely different participant credentials, IoT credentials, no one heard of. And those criteria can be completely different, and even the software of the compliance engine could be completely different. If you look at the past architecture, no way we could write or make that extensible. So we need, and actually that was the reason for doing a complete refactoring of the architecture. Did you? It worked. Yeah, but he pressed the button. Oh, no, it works. Yeah. It's not certified. What we wanted to do is to split in the architecture the extension mechanism, and I'll show you what it is, from the technical compatibility, because the underlying necessity of having cross-data space and cross-ecosystem interoperabilities, that they all share, this is why it's the foundation, they all share the same set of standards and protocols. Otherwise, we have the same situation as the Tower of Babel. Well, how can we do that? Before I show you how we did it actually, because it works. You can watch that tomorrow at 9 o'clock. This is not theory, it's implemented, and we have 2 use cases already running on that. I will carry you back a little bit how compliance works in Tagus and in Loire. You have some compliance checking software, no need to go into details. You have one monolithic set of code, and that set of code is exposing an API for service providers. They have to compile some of the self-declarations or certifications, go to the notary, they submit a credential request, it will be checked, and then the compliance engine will issue a verifiable credential, an electronic attestation that you are compliant. And we also know that the clearinghouses do that, and that we have more than one clearinghouse who is doing that for the democratization of trust. One thing which we generalized a little bit in Danube is that the clearinghouses kind of rely on a common databases. This is important for trust, that you have to share something. The ontology of Gaia-X, for instance, the list of the clearinghouses, for instance, and that's part or embodied and stored in the Gaia-X registry, which is kind of synchronized. Yeah, we could have done that in any blockchain or so, but it's much simpler because the need of the ecosystems is not there. This is the current architecture of Loire. How can we extend that by maintaining the overall way how to obtain credentials? Because we never wanted to change that. A service provider or a participant requests a credential, and then some magic software will check and will emit a credential. One of the true and proven patterns in software engineering for doing this kind of playing around with extensions, allowing modules at runtime modularization is that you invent like a dispatcher, like a gateway, like a small governance layer. We call that the Gaia-X core engine, and every single other compliance engine, including our own current Loire compliance engine, would be something like a module. We call that extensions, following the geography and domain extension sprint. We simply call the actual compliance engine. So the code where the rules are checked, we call that extensions. And the purple, you remember, the purple things have already been implemented by Gaia-X, by the lab team. So the Loire participant compliance and service compliance, it's up and running. But we also have been working with a use case in the International Manufacturing X Council since 5 or 6 months, because they need cross-ecosystem trust. And we implemented, for instance, here, a compliance engine for arbitrary company registry numbers. The use case was for Japanese company numbers. They are not part of the Loire compliance engine for good reasons, because it's European EIDAS, etc., trust anchors. But if a European ecosystem wants to do business with a Japanese one, we need to have a mechanism how to check Japanese company numbers. Danube provides the means to do that. But even more, we also, besides putting that in a technology in a compatible way. And that kind of almost side remark, yeah, we put everything in a technically compatible way. That is actually the core task of the core engine, to ensure the technical compatibility of all the standards. So independent of what compliance rule set you use, and we could, for instance, don't tell that we have not implemented anything. We have started some discussions with the Smart Connected Supply Network, but we have not started anything there. But technically, we would be able to implement something for foreign or other ecosystems. And of course, we also could invent, or actually ecosystems could invent and specify and implement IoT device compliance or any other ecosystem participant compliance. For instance, Catena-X, we could easily, with the domain extension, create a Catena-X compliant credential, because it's just adding the BPN, the business partner number, in the ontology. And it takes us, I don't know, 5 hours to implement that. And of course, what we also did, and this is work in progress, we also would kind of imagine that not everyone would want to move his or her compliance engine into that kind of harness or concept of the Gaia-X core engine. Not everyone is prepared to do that. For instance, iShare. The iShare network is much larger. You have separate entities, the former satellites, participant registries in iShare 3.0. How can we include them? Because we also want to interface and complement with them. And part of that is the core engine in ensuring technical compatibility. And the other part is that we explicitly allow in Danube that other compliant engine services, like an iShare participant registry, are or can be linked into the Danube architecture. So that's kind of federation within a compliance engine, and this is the way how, and we would have actually tried to show that, but iShare 3.0, which is the requirement for technical compatibility, because this is the uniting factor at the top, the technical compatibility they are implementing, and it should have been released today or will be released tomorrow. And at the bottom, I have not checked all the links because it's not necessary. We have something like the registries for the individual ecosystems do not play a role right now, but what we did is we invented initially something kind of as a helper function for the core engine. How would the core engine know to which compliance extension to route the request? How would it know? And one of the things to capture this information is like a registry, but it would be a registry about ecosystems, so we called it meta registry. And then, that was around the summer, and then we really had the discussion with the International Manufacturing X use case, where you have 3, 4, 5 different ecosystems with different ecosystem profiles. I will tell you in a second. And this is where the Gaia-X meta registry, that functional component, solves the dilemma of trust between self-sovereign ecosystems. I have that with me. If you look at the IMX use case, which actually will be presented at the SBS in Nuremberg on the 25th or 26th, if you look at the real manufacturing use case, you see a lot of things going on at the top layers. So the carbon footprint, etc., the OPC-UA stuff. However, also those ecosystems have these trust service providers because they do not universally trust. Even within an ecosystem, they do not trust everything. So you have trust service providers for the identity, of course, for connectors, for services, and for applications. That's one ecosystem. In manufacturing, in the International Manufacturing X Council, we have additional ecosystems where, for instance, the supply chain guys, they want to interact, of course, and take the data from the shop floor as well. The product passport also needs to include that partially, and then we have any other system, any other ecosystem which uses the data. Now, if you copy the approach of the first ecosystem, namely, we are sovereign, we have a lot of certificates we trust, we collect all of them. And then you have the second ecosystem, but we are sovereign too. We also do what we want. We have maybe the same application and business services certificates, but different service providers. How then, in such an autonomous situation, can you create or support trust between the ecosystems when, in fact, they are totally autonomous? How would you do that? And the answer is, you can't. You can't enforce that. However, because there is a business reason for doing that and a way how to trust it, both ecosystems has trust service providers. So if, and to the extent that one ecosystem, the manufacturing, trusts maybe just the Japanese trust anchor for identities, to that extent, you get, because that trust anchor is shared between the two ecosystems, you get cross-ecosystem trust between them. And of course, that typically needs to go vice versa. So also the Japanese ecosystem, we expect them to trust eIDAS providers, identity providers. Now, all of these decisions, which are individual ecosystem decisions, if we take all these individual ecosystem trust profiles and collect them, make them visible for all the partners in the ecosystem so that they know what is my trust set, whom can I trust from the other ecosystem. That is exactly the sweet point of the Gaia-X Major Registry. We developed the very first ontology, and the use case we present, I think, at 10 o'clock tomorrow. To my best and my team's best belief, no one has, as of today, demonstrated how cross-ecosystem trust really can be delivered technically. The DSCC has been talking about federated trust, etc. That is all fine. This is a working solution. So please come and also please contribute. This trust between ecosystems, we do not develop that in isolation. We only do co-development and co-innovation. Otherwise, I get another PhD, but we won't get adoption. So let's do it the other way. Only work with the ecosystems and develop the next step. I am a theoretical physicist. If you want me to summarize what I have just, and also what Roland has just told, I have one formula, which is not even bad, how Danube and Loire relate to each other. And the formula is very simple. And you can guess probably what the term D stands for. Of course, D, we're talking about Danube, is for the Danube architecture and the Danube release. If that's D for Danube, it's L for Loire. And I need really to, there is a myth somewhere also on the, in the Iberian Peninsula that Loire and Danube are totally incompatible and you have to do everything. This is, nothing could be farther from the truth. Actually, Loire is one extension of Danube. The problem is you cannot compare Danube and Loire. Loire is about compliance to a certain compliance documents, plus or minus, and Danube is an architecture for doing on a higher level something much more. And the much more is captured in the X. That's the extension mechanism. And in the bring your own rule set. And do you know why I have used a multiplication sign at the nominator and not a plus? Because this is where you see, with the extensions and Loire and the rules, the network effect, which is quadratically or exponential, when two ecosystems merge. And we allow that not just for European ecosystems, but for any ecosystem which is subscribing to the Gaia-X Major Registry and ontology. So that's really multiplication. Everything is possible only on the level of the technical compatibility. And you nicely see actually in that formula the two halves of our trust framework. And I have only one remark. If you want to understand or go more into the details, we have one session later today with the geography and extension and domain extensions, actually in the tech theater. So we are very friendly because we only win together, and together also in that case includes the projects. And we have something later today for Danube, tomorrow actually. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you now have a kind of a glimpse of in which direction Danube, the geography and domain extensions can take Gaia-X and the whole ecosystems. And I think that's the necessary level of technology and compliance, innovation we have implemented to support data spaces and digital ecosystems, Season 2. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.